the A7S III can compete with the best of the best for a fraction of the price in the cinema camera world. After 18 months with my A7S III and using it in many different scenarios, I've grown to love this camera, but I have had that constant feeling of wanting to upgrade to the latest and greatest. There have been many cameras that have come out in the last 18 months, such as the FX3, FX6, A7IV, and the A1, primarily competing directly with the A7S III. And this video is basically putting the A7S III up against each one of those cameras. Each one of those cameras I have used at different times. The only camera that I haven't used yet is the A7IV. Haven't been able to get my hands on it. I don't even know if I will at this point. But speaking of the A7IV, first up, that's the one we're gonna talk about. I can tell you that the A7IV is gonna be a great camera. It's gonna sell like crazy. People are gonna wanna buy this camera because it's a great hybrid camera. 33 megapixel photos, 4K 60 with a crop, not the end of the world though. Capability of 10-bit 422 internal. And all of that for the low price of $2,498. Now we all know that the photography side of the A7S III is its weak point, but let's look at the video specs versus the A7IV before we go into photo stuff. The A7S III allows you to shoot 4K 120, 4K 60, HD 120, and HD 240, all of which you can shoot in the 10-bit 422 codec, with virtually no overheating or crop. The only crop you'll have in this camera is the 4K 120. Before you click off and say the A7IV is good enough for you, let me make my case for why the A7S III, in my eyes, is a better purchase. The A7S III can compete with the best of the best for a fraction of the price in the cinema camera world. Let me know your thoughts down below if you don't agree with that statement, but it is the lowest barrier to entry in the cinema world. It is technically a stills camera, even though the photo side of it, you only get 12 megapixels. And we can go down this whole road of is 12 megapixels enough? That's up to you. If you need high resolution photos, need to do a ton of cropping, then yeah, this camera's not for you. But if you have the need to take some photos sometimes and primarily do everything video, then the A7S III I think is still your best purchase. You get all the frame rates and codecs you need to produce high-end video work. Not to mention, it can shoot 16-bit RAW externally, which honestly makes this the most versatile camera for the price in the history of cameras, really. I am talking about a camera that can really do it all. All right, now onto the two elephants in the room, the FX3 and the FX6, both of which is really the A7S III just in different forms. The FX3 is the A7S III just in cinema form, although it doesn't have a lot of things that make it a cinema camera, like waveforms, an internal variable ND, custom preview LUTs, or even a second quarter 20 on the bottom of the camera. And none of these things should persuade you not to buy the FX3 if you are primarily doing video, even though I would still buy the A7S III for one reason and one reason only, the viewfinder. It is important for me to have this, but in certain circumstances where you're trying to get proper exposure or proper focus, you kind of have to have the viewfinder in some cases, and it's a personal preference, I totally understand that. There is just something about holding that camera up and adjusting your focus or exposure that just kind of makes it nice to be able to see it very clear and with no interruptions on the back end or outside of it. Now, if I have to choose between the cinema ergonomics and the top handle with XLR inputs versus the viewfinder, I'm still gonna go viewfinder. And that's just my personal take on it. When I used the FX3 on a few jobs, it was awesome. And I do see where it fits in the market. But I don't think spending the extra money on a repackaged A7S III with no viewfinder is worth it for me personally. You could save that $400 and put it into a nice lens or something. What would you put that $400 into? Let me know down in the comments below. The FX6, however, is awesome. I loved this camera when I rented it. It has a very hefty feel compared to a hybrid camera. And the internal variable ND is amazing and almost the sole reason why you would spend $6,500 on a camera. I've ordered this camera twice and canceled it twice because I'm very impatient. I'm pretty sure this camera is never going to come off of back order. The fact that you can almost get two A7S IIIs for the same price of the FX6 is still why I go with the A7S III. Let me explain. You get the same dual gain sensor, the same codecs and frame rates, and the same low light performance. The only differences that we have between the two cameras is that you control the noise a little bit better on the FX6, and you get DCI 4K, which honestly you just crop a little bit. it'll be the same thing. Get the A7S III, a Sigma 24-70 f2.8, the Sony 35 f1.4, the Sony XLR mic setup, and a CF Express Type A card that allows you to unlock all the features of the A7S III. That's all for the same price, and you'll be just as happy, if not happier in the long run. Let me know in the comments down below how you would spend that $6,500. What lens combination or mic setup would you get? Now on to my favorite camera I've ever had the pleasure of using, the Sony A1. This camera is absolutely amazing, and buy this camera if you have the funds, full stop. It does everything that the A7R IV does, the A7S III does, the A9 II does, and it includes 8K, 10-bit 420. The A1 is just simply the perfect camera, and that 8K up to 30 frames per second, 10-bit 420 codec honestly surprised the crap out of me. 8K is nice when you have the opportunity to use it. I had this camera for a brief moment, but I straight up couldn't afford it. It's a very expensive camera, and rightfully so. I did notice the 8K rolling shutter just a little bit. I would not buy this camera for that reason. And I did actually miss the flip screen from the A7S III when I had this camera. The dual ISO is not as versatile on the A1 versus the A7S III, depending on who you ask. The A1 has a base ISO of 800 and 4000 in S-Log3. And the A7S III is 640 and 12,800. I use ISO 12,800 all the time. In fact, I'm shooting this video right now at ISO 12,800 f4 1/50th of a second. And personally, I like the look of this. The A1 is still a photography first camera, but when you put this camera into video mode, literally nothing holds you back. This is honestly the perfect hybrid camera, but just at the incredibly high price of $6,500. Rightfully though, it's worth the money. In wrapping this up, if your primary focus in 2022 is video, and you want the best cinema camera you can buy for under $4,000, the A7S III is that camera. It gives you literally almost everything the other cameras give you. The only real downside is the photo specs, but I personally think you should have a secondary camera for that anyway. Just my opinion for whatever it's worth. This camera can be built out for anything you put up against it in the moment, and gives you the ability to grow with it as you use it more and more. Make sure you leave a comment down below if you do or don't agree with my 2 cents on all of these cameras so far. Hit that like button if you got something out of this, and subscribe if you would like to. No pressure. Maybe check out another one of my videos, and we'll see you guys in the next one. Cheers.